All right, so we are going to get started. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Eve Sherbin.
And I'm Rachel Korn.
And together we co-chair NATAL's Young Professional Council. On behalf of NATAL and the rest of the council, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and support of NATAL's mission to provide treatment and resources for those dealing with PTSD and other mental health challenges. We are so excited to welcome Dr. Itamar Barnea, NATAL's Chief Psychologist, and we're looking forward to hearing from him about his work and path to NATAL. Itamar is a clinical psychologist and certified supervisor in psychotherapy. He received his doctorate in psychology from the University of Denver and continued his studies at the Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland, and the Jung Institute in Israel. Previously, he served as the head of psychology and psychiatry in the Israeli Air Force and as the head of the casualties department in the Israeli Defense Force.
Before we begin, we welcome Jude Recanati, NATAL's founder and chairperson, to share a few words.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or noon. Here it's evening, as you can see. So thank you so much for joining this wonderful opportunity to hear about NATAL. I'm really very moved by you doing it, by giving your time and your lunch break to hear about what we are going through here in Israel. As you can imagine, NATAL, which was founded 25 years ago, has a lot of experience and has been part of so many events during the last 25 years. And as you know, we had a lot of opportunities to join and do what we do in Israel. I'm very moved by Itamar being today with us and telling his vision about Israeli and national trauma and about his own story. So have a wonderful lunch, and thank you for your support, for your being with us, and have a continuation of wonderful, interesting event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jude. Itamar, once again, thank you for joining us today from Tel Aviv. We're so looking forward to hearing about your personal story and journey to NATAL. To frame the conversation, we think it is important to address the concept of national trauma, which is core to NATAL's mission. In your words, what is national trauma and how has it evolved and impacted Israeli society?
Good evening from Israel. Good afternoon in New York. I'm happy to be with you today. And it's a nice opportunity to meet with you and share with you a little bit about my thoughts, my experience, personal experience and professional experience that is very much interwoven with the Israeli society throughout the years. I'm already 72 years old. Maybe I look a little bit younger, but I'm still 72 years old. So I have already a lot of experience. Now, talking about national trauma, the Israeli society is a special society in terms of its complexities with trauma throughout the years. Many of the Jews who came here came from the Holocaust, and they came into the independence times of the creation of Israel. And then after the independence in 48, there was so many wars afterwards and operations. And basically the Israeli nation and people held the stance of strength, coping, and I will say also not relating to trauma in its depths in the first maybe 30, 40 years since its creation. Even though people who came from the Holocaust, who had difficulties, the society somehow looked at them as weak people. And it took maybe the first break or fracture was the Yom Kippur War. in the Israeli society. After a few wars, the Yom Kippur War was a very difficult war for the Israeli soldiers and for the Israeli society. And it broke something in the society. We are not just winning every time. We are not just strong. We can also feel the vulnerability of the society because it's a kind of accumulating trauma that is accumulating from time to time, from war to war. It's not finishing, it's not starting every time that something happens. It accumulates from previous times and traumas before. And I personally also was in the Yom Kippur War and fought, and I will tell about it later, but the Natal, like Judith said that it started like 23 years old, I started with Natal almost from the beginning, after 2-3 months of the creation of Natal. It was the time of Intifada, time of war within the country. And there were a lot of terror events at that time. And I remember that we opened Natal, we had only one patient who came, who was in the Holocaust, and then he was in the Independence War, and then he lost a son in one of the wars. And he was the first patient that we had. This was 23 years old, because the whole society was in a way coping without being ready to look at the vulnerability of the people. And Natal had a great message that we delivered since 25 years ago, that we have to look at the society not only on the strengths, but also on the weaknesses and the vulnerability, because when we integrate the two parts together, we become a much stronger society. And the trauma of the nation, the accumulating trauma of the nation, this message we delivered in the last 20 years. And there is a big change in the Israeli society, much because the message and the awareness that Natal created throughout the years. So this is a beginning that I want to say. My parents also came to Israel before the Second World War. My mother came from Poland. My cousin is also, I see her, she's in New York and she's here also listening today. And my mother fled Poland in 1938. Her parents sent 2 children to New York, the oldest daughter and the younger son. And my mother, who was in the middle, they sent her to use Aliyah to Israel by herself. And they stayed in Poland, and the whole family perished in the Holocaust. So part of the family was in New York, part of the family was in Israel, fighting for the creation of Israel. My mother did. And although she was not really in the Holocaust, it's in the background of almost every person in Israel. So this accumulating trauma is really something that we see throughout the years. Now, throughout the wars, also I'll say one more word, that the wars in Israel at the beginning were wars that we saw the war was in the front. And the civil population was not involved in the wars. But in the last 20 years, we are very much in wars that are connected also to the civil population and not only to the soldiers in the front. And NATAL is really dealing with both, with the civilians and with the soldiers that are in the front. This is okay.
Thank you, Itamar. We really appreciate that perspective, and we know that of all people, you have had firsthand experience with trauma. As you alluded to a little bit before, could you share your background and about your time in the Air Force?
Well, so I enlisted to the Air Force when I was 18 years old, became a fighter pilot in an American plane, Phantom. And during the Yom Kippur War, I was 23, 24 years old. I was in a very special squadron in the Air Force. We fought everywhere in the Middle East. And it was a very difficult and painful war. We lost almost half of our pilots and the navigators in the squadron. I was in every place in the Middle East, and from all missions I came back safely. But 1 or 2 days before the war ended, I had to go to a mission in the Syrian front. And I entered a dogfight, an air-to-air fight with we were two Phantoms, Israeli aircrafts, and 12 Syrian MiGs. I was young and very enthusiastic and very much without boundaries, I will say. I chased the MiG aeroplane from the Syrian heights to Damascus. I shot at him. I didn't succeed to perish the plane. And at a certain point, I decided that I have to return because I didn't have enough fuel already. And this was an area with a lot of missiles around and airplanes around me. So when I left him, without shooting him, I shot it, but I didn't succeed to target him. And when I left him, I felt that the airplane was hit in a very severe way. I had to leave the airplane to eject it with my navigator. He was a friend who just came from the States, as a matter of fact. 1 day before, he was in kind of a training in the United States. And both of us, we had to eject the plane very close to Damascus. It was a very difficult moment, very painful moment, because you move from a situation that you feel a lot of power and strength to a situation of helplessness, that you are parachuting down to the ground, looking downwards. I see hundreds of Syrian soldiers shooting at me on the parachute, starting to hit me in the legs and in the body. And the same thing with my navigator. When I hit the ground, my right leg was an open fracture, and I already, because of the bullets that I got also on the parachute. Also, when we were on the parachutes, also MiG airplanes started to shoot at us from the airplanes on us on the parachutes. Just to tell you that 1 year before the war, I hit a MiG airplane in Syria, and the pilot parachuted from it. And I was very happy that I succeeded to hit him, but I was also glad that he succeeded to parachute safely. Somehow I didn't feel that I want to kill him or so. But when we were on the parachutes, the pilots, the Syrian pilots, came and shoot with their cannons on our parachutes. So this was kind of a horrified situation. Anyhow, I was just in control, but I was falling on the ground, and then I saw like 100 Syrian soldiers coming and shooting at me from all sides. And until one came, and from like 1 meter, he aimed his gun and shot on my chest, and then I fell back. And the first moment I entered into some kind of an experience of being out of my body, kind of depersonalization, we call it today. The body and the psyche are not together anymore. And I could see myself from the outside. It was a very strange situation. And I was waiting. The officer, the Syrian officer who was there, stopped the soldier from continuing to shoot at me. At that point, I already got like 7 bullets in my body. And I was on the ground. They took me and they put me on a truck, on the back of a truck. And then they took my navigator, who parachuted close by to me, and they put his body on myself. He was lying on me all the way to Damascus. And when they put his body on me, I could feel that he's not alive. I was sure that he's not alive because the way he was lying on me, this was not a feeling of a person who is alive. And then we came to Damascus. I was separating from my family, from my parents, from my wife who was pregnant at that time, and said hello to them because I thought that I would not survive that hit. And we came to the hospital. The civilians also hit us when on the stairs to the hospital. And then I was the next picture is in the operating room. On one hand, the interrogators, and on the other hand, the doctors. So this was a very strange situation. They started to interrogate me, and the doctors were on the other side. I was kind of half conscious in a way. And in a way, I forgot. I had a kind of dissociative memory problem. I couldn't remember almost anything from the questions that they asked me about my friends, about my squadron. I didn't answer because I just couldn't remember it at that point. And then they operated on me. They removed my right lung altogether. I stayed with I'm only with 1 lung today. And they operated another, also on my leg and my body. And I was lying in a cellar with closed eyes for about 2 months without treatment, going through interrogations, until I was moved to the prison. And in the prison, another 2 months with like in solitary confinement. And afterwards, with a group of like 20 officers together, until we were released in the 1st of June, 1974, altogether 8 months. So this was a situation that was very difficult, and it stayed with me, of course, for the years afterwards. Just to say that when I came back and I was in a bad situation in my breathing and everything. I almost couldn't breathe when I came back because of the way they did the operation. I was sent to the United States to make an operation that will put together the mediastinum for that I'll be able to breathe more normally. And I came to California with a Jewish doctor who was that I was very much connected to him until the day he died, of course. And he brought me to Stanford, California. And then there was another American Jewish doctor who was really had a great idea. He said, because your heart is under your right shoulder and the whole mediastinum was moved to the right chest, we have to do something to put all the organs back into place. And he came with the idea that he would put a women silicone in my chest, in my inner chest. And they built it and they put it in my inner chest after the second operation there. The first one didn't succeed. And so I'm the only man in the world with the silicone in my chest. And this is a special operation that had never been done since then in the world. Wow. But when I was there in Stanford, lying in the bed and had the bleeding and a lot of problems, I'm not going to elaborate on that, I decided to start to study psychology. The first time that I opened the introduction to psychology was in Stanford, California, in the bed of the hospital. I opened the book and I started to look at what is it psychology. I came from a family that, I was studying agriculture and I was maybe thinking about going to be a farmer or maybe to study, to be a physician, but I didn't think about psychology. So somehow the whole experience, and this was back in 1974, that the whole issue of trauma was not yet developed. It was developed only at the beginning of the 1980s, after Vietnam and after the whole thing of abuse of women was developed, the whole notion of PTSD. But when I was there on the bed, I opened first time the book of Introduction to Psychology without really awareness of what was going on with me then and afterwards. It took me a while to understand what was really the impact of that on me.
Wow. Itamar, thank you so much for sharing. I think speaking on behalf of all of us on this call, we can't imagine what your experience was like, and we appreciate hearing it from you, and we thank you for your time serving Israel. And now turning a bit towards Natal, for many people on this call, it's their first exposure or introduction to Natal and Natal services. In your words, can you explain what is Natal and how you initially got connected? I know you touched on it in the beginning, but kind of linking the story back and what drew you to the organization.
Okay. So as I said, I started with Natal almost like 2 months after Natal was established by Jude and by Dr. Yossi Adar. Unfortunately, when he established with Jude the Natal, after 2 months, he died from leukemia. And Jude called me and asked me to participate and to be with her to found Natal. And as I said, there was no awareness in the Israeli society to trauma and the impact of trauma. And it was just looked as kind of weakness and not as a part that is, as I say today, okay? I'm not looking at PTSD and at trauma from the point of view of pathology. I'm look at it from the point of view of a tragic reaction of a person to what was going on with him in a very traumatic event. It's tragic. It's a kind of a tragedy that happens to people, that what we have to do and what Natal is doing is, first of all, to recognize it and to accept it, that people react to traumas, to severe traumas, either civilians or soldiers or people in other acts of trauma. And the reaction is many times tragic, because many times people were okay before. They lived their life and something is really broke in their path of life. And this tragic, we have to recognize, and this is what Natal brought, to say, let us look at the people that have impact on them, and when you recognize it, and then afterwards, you give treatment to that, people can go back to life in a much more full way. They will be much more a whole person with what was injured and with what was in the parts that are most strong within themselves. So Natal, what we did at the beginning was, first of all, to open a hotline, which is a very special hotline. All the ideas that we had at that time that developed throughout the years, it's a hotline that is not only accepting the calls of civilians or ex-soldiers after traumas, but is also have an ongoing connection with the people, sometimes for years, because there are people who are ashamed or afraid to start with treatment, with psychotherapy. And the hotline, our hotline, is very special, is built on מתנדבים, on
Volunteers.
volunteers, non-professional people, but who get a long course of learning and understanding the issue of trauma and how to help with that. And these people are really giving hands to tens of thousands of people every year, okay? So touched more than 300,000 people throughout the years, in the last 20 years or so, which is a lot. And each year we give treatment to maybe like 700-800 people, psychotherapy, which is also very much tailored to what the person needs. It's the person itself, sometimes his spouse, the children, the parents, and we do it individually, couple, group therapy, a group of women fighters who have PTSD, groups of men, and all this we do in a way that we are going very deeply into what the person needs. And then from what he needs, we tailored somehow the answer or the treatment that he will get. So this is you said about Natal. So Natal, I see it like in two ways. First of all, we have this outline, then we have the treatment, and then we do a lot of work also with prevention and resilience of the society. Resilience in the towns of Israel, of how to prevent trauma, and how to make the societies in areas, special areas, more ready for difficult times and times of war. And we also work in the States, also in some places with first responders in the States, because of a lot of knowledge that we got throughout the years of how to do it.
Thank you, Itamar. I think all of us on this call are curious to learn a little bit more about your personal role within NATAL and what are the specific initiatives that you're working closely on.
So right now I'm mainly kind of a mentor and giving supervision to people and to the clinical staff, giving supervision, and I'm less involved than I was in the past. But there are younger people who do a lot of enthusiastic work, and with the young generation at NATAL, they do fantastic work, also in Israel and in the States and abroad with Jewish communities and non-Jewish communities as well. And so today my personal role is more kind of mentoring and supervising.
Mm-hmm. So most of us on the Zoom are in America and have not lived through war. What do you think is one of the most important things that the audience should take away from this conversation, and why are NATAL's services so important for a resilient Israel?
Well, I think that NATAL gives something that has never been, never happened in Israel, really. It's a special organization with a lot of knowledge, which gives really, as I said, prevention, treatment, resilience to all the Israeli society. There are other organizations, but this is a kind of a profound and very leading organization, all the time improving and moving forward with ideas. And now there is a young generation of young people, not only at NATAL, but the young generations of the young soldiers today, in a way, I can say that they are more vulnerable than my generation was. Not because that they are weaker, okay? But because in a way they accumulate within themselves what we were going through in the previous generations. So it's a kind of, as we say about Holocaust, the second, third generation, we see also in Israel like the second and third generation of young people who are fighting today and giving to the nation in what they do. But I see that the reaction of them to severe situations is in a way more vulnerable. And it's not because they are weaker people. As I said, because it's accumulating trauma throughout the years that they carry. So that's the part that we want, and we hope one day to live in a more peaceful way without wars. And it will be much more normal kind of situation for the young people. I personally, my sons were in the military, and each of them had some difficulties. And I think that we have to think a lot about the young generation in Israel. It's not easy. It's really not easy. On the other hand, they are much more open to get help. They are much more open to get help. They come to get help. They are helped, really. I see that they are very happy with the help that they get at NATAL. And I feel that they really have a home, a safe home. To come, it's a safe home that gives them recognition, that gives them strength, that gives them tools of how to deal with the difficulties, how to deal. Many of them carry a lot of feelings of guilt and shame and failure and difficult kind of feelings that they have to carry, and how to deal with it. It's not easy.
Thank you for that. We're getting some questions from the audience, and we also, wanted to ask you this. How have you seen changes in the experience of trauma with the COVID-19 pandemic? and how has Natal responded to this challenge?
First of all, Natal, at the beginning of the COVID, Natal was, even though it's not a trauma that is a national trauma, that the way we phrase it, Natal opened its hotline to COVID people that will call. Because at the beginning, as we say, at the beginning, it was very difficult. I mean, the first phase of the COVID was much more difficult. People were with a lot of anxiety and difficult to be alone at home. And we opened our hotline to people who called and got support also from us to COVID people. But what I see is a complicated situation with the people who have PTSD and face the COVID. Many of them at the beginning regressed in their situation. They felt much more anxious and much more depressed and much more with difficult fears. And but I see that people somehow throughout the waves are continuing to normalize it in a way and live with it in a better way. Israel also the first nation that started with vaccination, and we did a lot of acts to prevent the difficult situation, even though the situation was and still is not easy. And some of my friends, of course, for instance, who were in solitary confinement like myself, I myself felt that I know to be in solitary confinement. I did already for 8 months, so I felt okay during the months that we stayed at home. I liked to stay at home. But really, some of my friends and some of my patients also had very difficult times not being able to get out of home, because it's like to get out of themselves and not just staying with what they feel within themselves. They need the outlet. We know that people need the nature and the outlet and the movement. There was a permission for people who were with PTSD and the handicapped to drive during the time that it was a home seger, that we were not allowed to go.
Lockdown.
Lockdown, right?
Yeah, lockdown.
Right. So people with the PTSD and people with handicapped, they got permission from the government to drive in the car and to go around.
Nice.
People could not stay at home. They felt that they have to move. They have to move to discharge themselves from the stress and the fear. And one of my patients, he drove to Eilat, and from Eilat to the north, he couldn't stay at home. So there was an impact on people, especially on the people who were really deep in post-trauma.
Thank you so much, Itamar. We want to take the remaining time to open the conversation to those at home and in the office to ask questions. We kindly ask that if you have a question that you post it in the chat, and Rachel and I will read them aloud for Itamar. And also you'll notice a link in the chat where you can provide donation to support Natal's work and Itamar's work.
If someone wants to say something as a reaction to that, not just to ask questions, this is fine for me from my point of view too.
Okay, great. So our first question is from Steve. What makes the Israeli experience so unique, and how do you find Natal's services and approach to treating trauma resonate outside of Israel?
What was the last 2 words that you said, the Natal experience?
What makes Natal's approach to treating trauma resonate outside of Israel? So also in the US.
Okay. Okay. first of all, I think the approach that we have at NATAL is a special approach because we give a whole a kind of a package that the person needs and the family of the individual needs. So we treat the person as a whole with the whole family around him, and sometimes the friends, the group of people around him in the unit. And so this is a special package that I don't think that is done in other places. Okay, and it's really complicated because just to give the person treatment without seeing what's going on around him with the family and the children and the spouses and the parents sometimes is really not enough. And we developed this from the beginning of NATAL. And this is very special. And this model is very special. And people also get treatment. The person himself can get treatment, the talking treatment and physical treatment, and not only psychiatric, but also with the movement therapy and art therapy. So we give the person a full package of what he needs.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Emily, who asks, how did you begin to treat others while also still focusing on your own healing from your own personal trauma?
That's a nice question. There is a notion, the notion of the wounded healer, which I use many times. And what I feel that in a way, I know what the patients are going through also, of course, throughout the feelings and the things that I deal with within myself. And I know that there are parts in trauma, and as I said in the beginning, it's a tragedy, because there are parts of the trauma that can be healed and parts of the trauma that cannot be healed.
Be managed.
The person has to know, has to learn in a gradual way, because it's really difficult to accept it, that there are parts that are difficult to accept. For instance, I can say about myself, there are times that I feel more depressed, there are times that I feel, again, like the last year, there were a few books that were written in Israel, and it opened for me a whole feeling again of guilt feelings about my navigator who died. And I had to go to the cemetery and be there with him. And then one of his nephews came also, and he saw how difficult it was for me. And he said to me, we love you. You don't have to feel so guilt about it. We love you all these years, and we don't blame you for what happened, because I was the commander of the plane. So it's my responsibility to, in a way, to bring the whole crew back home. But what I say is that knowing the feelings and how to deal with guilt, and how to deal with shame, how to move from guilt to responsibility, for instance. These are main themes that you have to deal with in therapy. And when you touch it within yourself and you do the work with yourself, also the patient is also can move with what he is going through. And sometimes I say that as much as the therapist can progress with himself, with the awareness within himself, is the parallel process, is the parallel process of the patient. So I feel that it's a kind of, for me, it's working is also helping myself in a way, okay? which is, I say it every day for me, for myself.
Teaching is learning.
I did a long way throughout the years with myself, and still I have issues with what happened, and it's okay. So I think we both can benefit from it.
Thank you for sharing that. We got another question from Alan. From your clinical experience treating veterans, what are some things that impact the immediate family, and how does this gauge within their treatment?
How does it?
How does this kind of manifest within their treatment? So,
This is a difficult problem, because many of the people, there are people who are functioning, but they react very severely towards their surroundings. They function, but they can be very angry. They can be very impulsive. They can be very aggressive sometimes. They blame others. So the people who surround them, like the spouses and children, they carry many times this anger and many times it's connected also to lack of awareness of the patient himself or herself to what's really going on within himself. They project it onto others, and we see with many spouses that they became throughout the years kind of caregivers of the patient on one hand, but they feel a lot of guilt in the way they live every day, because if they don't really get recognition to what they are going through all the years and get tools of how to deal with that. That's the reason that we have also groups of women, of spouses, so that they can work on these issues together in a group. This is in addition to couples work that we do. But I think that this is one of the issues that people many times project their difficulties onto others, and the others have this what we call secondary traumatization, that they carry the trauma within themselves, the trauma of the person himself. So this is something that we relate to it, and we really give recognition, and we relate to it very, very, very closely.
Thank you. And I think we'll take one more question, which is a nice note to end on. This is from Liza. How do you see NATAL's work changing as the climate in Israel continues to evolve?
Well, NATAL is working much more now, first of all, in the communities of the civilians, in the south and in the north. And as a matter of fact, if a new war will be around here again, this can hit every place in Israel, from the north and from the side, from the south altogether. So we have a lot of work we do to strengthen the civilian population, and the social workers and the physicians. We teach about trauma and how to deal with that, and to prepare for what will happen in the future. So this is one direction. The other direction is that we try to find now ways to treat post-traumatic people also in the nature, people that will not go into hospitals and things like that, because this is not the right environment for this kind of people. I'm talking about people who are in difficult situations, to build homes for them in the nature that they will do work, and also artwork and work in the nature, in agriculture, so people can do things and at the same time get treatment. So this is a new combination that we are working on right now. And the whole thing about the young population is something that is very much developed now at NATAL, because really it's a new generation. They have different needs, and we have to open our minds to new ideas.
Thank you, Itamar. In the interest of time, we're going to begin our wrap up. If you have further questions about NATAL's work, please feel free to reach out to us through our email in the chat. On behalf of the Young Professional Council of Natal, Itamar, thank you so much for your time today. Your story is inspiring, and thank you for your commitment to Natal and the mental health of Israeli citizens. I welcome Jamie Seltzer, Director of the American Friends of Natal, to wrap up our conversation.
We don't hear you. We don't hear you.
Sorry. I want to thank everybody who's been with us today, especially thank Rachel and Eve, our co-chairs of the Young Professional Council, and all of the council members, most who are with us today. I would also like to thank Jude Yovel Recanati for being with us. She's an inspiration, our founder, and every day provides more reasons why Natal must be the best in the world. Also, Itamar, I've heard you several times today. You were outstanding. We are so happy that you helped be part of our first Lunch and Learn session. I also want to thank the Natal team here in the States, AFN, Kim and Naomi, who helped, and Ifat and her international team in Israel for working with us. We all work together so closely. Just would like to add a few points that AFN's mission in the United States is to create greater awareness and engagement around the work of Natal, for people to learn more about what we do, to become involved with us, and for us to be able to raise the necessary funds to provide to Natal so that they can continue doing the great work that's happened over the past 25 years and, God willing, for many years in the future. Although I would wish we would have less people that are suffering from PTSD and needing the services. But as long as we need the services, it's incredible to have Natal be here. So we thank you. This is being recorded. We'll provide it to everybody so you can forward to friends. And thank you so much for your support. And please support us with a gift to AFN Natal. Thank you.
I want also to thank you for allowing us to be with you today. It's a special event for us, and it's nice that you came and share with us our experience and our mission in Israel. And I feel that you are with us. This is a very good feeling for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it, and look out for further events.
Thank you. Stay safe and healthy.